Previously on The K-Source.
And in 722 BC, the Assyrians conquer the northern kingdom. The northern kingdom that, if you remember, consisted of 10 out of the 12 tribes of Israel have been conquered. And how do the Israelites respond to their Assyrian occupation? They marry them. We're all aware that Jerusalem was the capital of that former kingdom called Judah.
I was not aware of that.
But what was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel? The capital of the now defunct northern kingdom was Samaria. Now, why that's relevant is that if you recall that when the Assyrians conquered the northern kingdom, the inhabitants of that kingdom, the Israelites, which included Samaria, intermarried those Assyrian invaders. And they adopted the Assyrian religion and abandoned their relationship with Yahweh. When Cyrus the Great put an end to the Babylonian captivity, the Jews went back home. The prophets started a campaign to rebuild the temple in what's now going to be referred to as the Second Temple. This caught the interest of the former northern kingdom, particularly those from Samaria. What do we call those from Samaria? Samaritans. And the Samaritans wanted to reclaim their identity as people of God. After all, they are descendants of Abraham. And they went down south and offered their assistance to the Jews to rebuild the temple. Of course, the Jews are like, we don't want your kind around here. You apostatized. You abandoned your relationship with God.
So I have a few faults, who doesn't?
You're impure. Remember, this is a Judaism now, it's obsessed with purity. You are impure, and no impurity is going to play a role in the construction of this second temple. Well, obviously, people don't like to be rejected. So the Samaritans, rather than just walking away, chose then to interfere with the construction of the temple, to loot it, to vandalize, to slow down progress. Fast forward to the time of Jesus. If you recall, the Jews are not fond of the Samaritans. And we know now why. Because it was not only because they apostatized on Yahweh during the Assyrian invasion, but also they slowed down progress in building the house of God. Of course, the great funny in all of that is, as I kept mentioning, the Jews really weren't interested in building a new temple. So here you are, you have an eager group of people called the Samaritans that are, of course, descendants of Abraham. Former Israelites, right, who are eager to rebuild, yet those who aren't eager to rebuild are telling them, no, we don't want your help. Religious politics, right? This background helps us understand the story of Jonah.
Jonah?
Now, Catholics believe that there was a prophet named Jonah. Is this his story? Like, did he actually do the things that are talked about in this book? We don't know. Perhaps it was the prophet himself who wrote this story. As Catholics, we identify the Book of Jonah as a parable. Now, a parable is a short story with a striking, memorable comparison. We had the tendency to reduce parables to just being some short little cute story to teach a message. But this is actually missing something quite dramatic about the literary style called a parable. Because in this definition, I said that it is a striking, memorable comparison. A parable is meant to strike you, to let the listener or the reader do a double take. Wait, what? Every single one of Jesus' parables in the New Testament were meant to strike the audience in their hearts, to usually invoke change, to change the mentality. Jesus was rocking people's worlds with parables, using familiar imagery to shake things up a bit. That is what's happening in the book of Jonah. Now, the character of Jonah in this book can be classified in literary terms as an anti-hero. An anti-hero literary term is when a character is placed in the role of a traditional hero, but is not idealized in any way. Walter White, Dexter, going back a couple years, Dr. House. Frank Underwood from House of Cards, right? If you're watching Dexter and you're thinking, man, I really wish I was a serial killer. Or Dr. House, I really wish I was a drug addict, sarcastic doctor with no friends. There's something a little bit wrong with you. Walter White. These are anti-heroes, quite popular on TV right now. Jonah is an anti-hero. He is not one that the audience should sympathize with or idolize. He's the protagonist in who we are following, but he has a lot of character flaws. Now, in short, God asks Jonah to go to the city of Nineveh to preach to its citizens. Nineveh is the former capital of the Assyrian Empire. Remember the Assyrians? Just got done talking about them. These are the people who conquered the northern kingdom, right? These were the people who conquered the northern kingdom. God is asking Jonah to go preach to the Assyrians, the former enemy of Israel. Jonah's like, I'm not interested in that. So he hops on a ship and goes in the opposite direction. And then after a period of time, the storm comes, the waters start to shake the boat, and Jonah comes to realize, oh shoot, this is all because of me. And he throws himself overboard. Instead of drowning, a big fish comes by.
Matter of fact, it says a great fish.
Okay, sorry. A great fish comes by, swallows Jonah whole, and after 3 days, he is released. He's spat out. If you ever get to go to the Sistine Chapel at the Vatican, on the ceiling, very prominently displayed, is this image of Jonah and the fish. Because Christians like to see the resurrection parallel here. That after 3 days of being in the belly of the beast, the hero has life. Of course, this hero is nothing like Jesus, right? Jonah is the anti-Jesus. So he's already disobeyed God's orders once. Jonah says to God that I did not want to go and preach to the citizens of Nineveh because I know that you are a compassionate Father and that you will forgive them. And Jonah believes that these Assyrians should not be forgiven. So he flat out did opposite of what God asked him to do because he thinks that he knows better than God. Ultimately, Jonah goes to Nineveh, and it's probably the easiest conversion in the entire Bible. The citizens of Nineveh now worship Yahweh. And Jonah's like, great. And he leaves Nineveh, and he goes out into the desert, and it's really, really hot, and he's really uncomfortable, and then he starts to wish for death. God sees his anguish. He hears Jonah's cries, and a bush sprouts up and provides Jonah with some shade. And then suddenly a worm comes, and the bush dies, and Jonah starts cursing the world again and cursing his life, saying it was better if I was never even born, because now I had a bush and I had a shade, and now the shade is gone. It would have been better if that bush never even happened. I don't know why Jonah sounds like Napoleon Dynamite. God! The ending of Jonah, as is the case in all parables that Jesus tells us, is the striking part. But God said to Jonah, is it right for you to be angry about the bush? And he said, yes, angry enough to die. Then the Lord said, you are concerned about the bush for which you did not labor and which you did not grow. It came into being in a night and perished in a night. And should I not be concerned about Nineveh, that great city in which there are more than 120,000 persons who do not know their right hand from their left, and also many animals? And that's the end of Jonah. What was so striking about that? Jonah is wishing for his own death because there was shade that he had for one day, and he didn't put any work into that shade. That shade was a gift from God, and now it was taken away from him. This is supposed to be God's prophet, and he cares more about the shade, he cares more about the bush than he does about 120,000 people that don't know their right hand from their left. God is saying to Jonah, they know nothing about me.
Nothing!
Yet Jonah, my dearest friend, Jonah, you're a prophet. You should know better. I asked you to go to Nineveh and you went in the opposite direction. I gave you a great fish to give you a second chance. Then you go to Nineveh, these people convert. This is what I wanted to happen, and you're cursing because you don't think they deserve compassion. Jonah, you are a prophet of God and you're being an idiot. You're telling me what fairness is? You think you know more than me. Jonah gets second chances for disobeying God. Don't the Assyrians deserve a second chance? And what is striking about the parable, of course, is that Jonah represents the Jews. The Ninevites represent any enemy of Judaism. In this case, it's the Assyrians. But how did I begin today's lesson? By talking about the Samaritans. And God is saying, if they want to come back, I'm going to forgive them. I'm going to show them compassion.
I still love you.
Jews, maybe you ought to as well. Because this covenant, like the bush, I gave to you freely. I could take it away if I want to. These people don't know their right hand from their lefts. Can't they be part of this covenant as well? Jews, it's time to forgive your enemies. Are there any Jesus parables that sound like this? Lots. The one that I keep thinking about is, of course, Prodigal Son, Gospel of Luke. You have the faithful son, the Jews. You have the prodigal son, the one who runs away, the Samaritans, the former Israelites. They come back to the father throws the prodigal son a party. And then that faithful son is sitting there complaining, I never got a party. And the father ends that story by saying, your brother was lost and now he's found. He was dead and now he has life. Very similar to the ending of the Jonah story. They didn't know better. Now they know. There is life. They deserve a second chance, just like you got a second chance, Jonah. This was a story of compassion. This was a story of forgiveness. It's about loving your enemies. The Assyrians were the enemies. The Samaritans were lost souls. This is a God that looks a lot like the New Testament God that Jesus is going to demonstrate for us.
Jonah was a prophet,
Ooh, ooh.
but he really never got it.
Sad but true.
If you've been watching, you can spot it.
A doodly-doo.
He did not get the point.
Compassion and mercy from me to you and you to me. Exactly what God wants to see. And yes, that is the point.
Jonah was a prophet,
Ooh, ooh.
but he really never got it.
Sad but true.
If you've been watching, you can spot it.
A doodly